Chapter 15. The three-digit number she'd been assigned was an alternating combination of a number believed to be lucky and one said to indicate death. She'd persuaded Kitamura and 3 part-time university students from the company to join the queue with her from early morning, but in the end, it was Rika herself who'd landed the winning ticket. On so many occasions in the past she had lined up like this, but this was the first time she got one of the admittance tickets everyone was craving. It was a weekday, yet more than 300 people had joined the queue for 65 courtroom seats. Scoring an entry ticket made Rika think that she and Kajii did have some kind of connection after all. Around them stood the not-so-young women who were the spitting image of Manako Kajii, dubbed the Kajimana girls by the mass media. They wore dresses of sky blue and baby pink teamed with cardigans, their half-up, half-down hair held in place with bow-shaped barrettes. Rika felt like she had stumbled into a science fiction novel where the world was ruled by Kajii clones. The trees lining the pavement gave out the smell of young, fresh greenery, and their leaves dappled the sunlight cast upon the ground. May had only just begun, but the air was dry, and it already felt like summer was on the way. After thanking Kitamura and the others and seeing them off as they vanished inside the subway, Rika slipped inside the entrance to the Tokyo High Court. The other men and women lucky enough to get their hands on tickets packed into the lift like sardines in a tin. When they got to the correct floor, Rika was spat out along with them and waited in a long line to have her bag searched. With a jotter and a pen in hand, she joined a different line, this time to enter the courtroom. Reporters wearing armbands slid past her several times, ducking as if to erase their presence. The wood-effect door opened, and the line began slowly disappearing inside. Anyone who wished to was allowed to remain outside, while the press photographers were taking pictures of the courtroom. Rika stood in the corridor, now mostly emptied of people, gazing down at the trees blowing about in the wind outside. It had been a year since the first trial, and the fervor had cooled somewhat, yet there had still been almost 5 times the average number of people waiting for tickets. Thanks to Rika's article, whose final installment had been printed the previous day, public interest in the case was resurfacing. There was already talk at Shimaisha about publishing the article as a book. The 6th and final part of the article touched upon what Kajii had felt at Le Salon de Mayuko, how she had behaved, how hurt she had been, and how she felt now after her arrest and detention. To write it, Rika had had to forget everything she herself had seen and heard at the cooking school and reconstruct the events through Kajii's eyes. At first, Kajii had portrayed the lessons as far more showy than they actually were, and the students as ever so prim, but after Rika confessed that she'd used a fake name to attend the lessons several times and mentioned Chizu's name, Kajii had become less insistent. After various digressions, she even admitted how comfortable she'd felt there. Generally, when she spoke about women, Kajii would without fail turn to insulting them, but her tone became slightly kinder when speaking of Madam and the other students. I asked them lots of questions. That was my way of doing my very best to show my interest and get close to them. But she couldn't altogether stop herself from criticizing them. I was the only one who practiced what we were going to learn in advance and revised what we had done already. It seemed as though they weren't really serious about learning to cook, and they didn't care much about their husbands and lovers either. Cold-hearted women. When Rika feigned agreement, Kajii's tongue grew even looser. By bringing up elements of Chizu's account, Rika managed to elicit a version of the turkey incident from Kajii's perspective, how she'd been enraged by the way they'd decided on what to cook without her consent after she'd shown them such goodwill, and had run out of the classroom. It was Rika's hope that this portrayal would help disperse at least some of the prejudice surrounding the school. When she got to the visitors' gallery, Rika looked around. Staring straight ahead in their allocated seats, the defense lawyers and prosecution all wore perfectly blank expressions, seemingly calculated to cool the excitement of the crowd. She looked for Hitoko but couldn't see her. Of late, Rika had put her apartment hunting on pause. Her feelings of guilt towards Hitoko, for pouring so much effort into the search, were winning out after all. Most of those in the gallery were women. She spotted the faces of a few writers, journalists, and others she recognized. For a second it occurred to her that all of them, herself included, had come together to inflict an injustice on Kajii. A bitter taste spread out from the back of her throat and through her body. Eventually the judges entered, and the voice of the Chief Justice rang out, announcing that the court was open. Then a tangible ripple ran through the room. Kajii had appeared in handcuffs from the door on the left, accompanied by a prison guard. Rika felt a wave of relief. Kajii had told her that she intended to attend the court, but there was no obligation for the defendant to make an appearance at the retrial, and she had wondered if she might, in fact, not show. Directed by the Chief Justice to state her name, she replied in a voice so quiet as to be almost inaudible, "Manako Kajii." After confirming her date of birth in a feeble voice, she sat down alongside the defense lawyers. Outside the small detention house visiting room, in this high-ceilinged courtroom devoid of decorative excess, Kajii looked like a giant blancmange. There was a tenacious fragility to her. She was not repelling the piercing gazes directed her way, and seemed sunken into herself, just about succeeding in retaining her shape. Her lips, rosy pink against her smooth, opaque, white skin, were drawn together in a tight bow, creating a dimple on her chin, and her eyes, whose lids looked heavy as if she'd recently been crying, were focused on a point in the middle distance, as though she were seeking help. Her defiant attitude in the first trial, the lack of manners she so often showed, now seemed like a fiction. Above all, her appearance seemed remarkably slapdash in comparison to the times Rika had met her in the visiting room. Over a pair of leggings, she wore a charcoal gray dress of a sweatshirt fabric which masked all the contours of her body, the kind of outfit you'd expect someone to wear exclusively around the house. Even from this distance, Rika could tell that she was wearing a sturdy push-up bra, making her think that perhaps the rumor that she wore underwear sent into the prison by her male supporters, of which there were supposedly quite a few, was true. Yet leaving that aside, with strands of stray hair stuck to her forehead, the impression she gave was an unkempt one. Rika turned her glance on the male lawyer with the well-defined jaw sitting next to her, his long hair tied back. He wore round glasses and his face was dusted with stubble. His way of narrowing his eyes made him seem overly self-conscious, but he was famous for being supremely talented. She had interviewed him twice in connection with other cases. For the most part, Kajii kept her eyes pinned on the ground, but from time to time she would open them wide, batting her eyelashes and hunching her shoulders forlornly. Only her eyebrows looked as potent as ever. The lawyer began to read out the reasons for the appeal in a low, mumbling voice. From time to time, Kajii would turn to him and nod her head, as if in support. Rika stared fixedly at her, feeling much as if she'd just woken from a dream. How is it that these past 6 months she had been so mesmerized by this woman? Surrounded and protected by people as she was, she now seemed in Rika's eyes a thoroughly weak-willed character, incapable of deciding anything for herself. Maybe she was, in fact, utterly lacking in things she wanted to do or to say. Perhaps it was her lies, which had nothing to do with her real wishes and which she'd simply used as a way of getting through whatever circumstance was currently at hand, that had carried her to the place where she was now. Quite possibly, when it came to her online dating and prostitution, she had made no decisions herself, but simply reached for whatever was esteemed by the world. The fact that everything she'd sought was so pricey seemed to support that hypothesis. All of a sudden, Kajii looked towards the public gallery. The movement of eyes suggested she was looking for someone. Rika tried to catch her gaze, but like a firefly, it eluded her time and time again. The new evidence presented by the defense was very minor. For days before he died, Hatoko's brother Tokio had been in a cafe in Hakaminyama he used for meetings. In a guest book which the regulars passed around, he had written something hinting at his desire to take his own life, perhaps in response to sensing Kajii's change of heart about their relationship. This had come to light because the cafe had recently closed, and the owner had stumbled upon the note while reading over the messages from the past 10 years. The handwriting analysis had returned the conclusion that it almost certainly belonged to Tokio. Even including the back and forth between the defense and the prosecution, The first hearing was over after 30 minutes. There was no opportunity for Kajii to speak, and the Chief Justice called for a re-examination of the notebook. The date for the next hearing was not yet determined. Along with all the other people there, Rika watched Kajii as she disappeared from the courtroom accompanied by a prison guard, rounded back, swollen cheek glimpsed from the side, disheveled black hair. Their eyes hadn't met once the whole time. She could have invited her mother, whom she hadn't seen since New Year, to join her, but Rika felt she wanted to come alone. It had been 8 years since she'd last visited the Yokohama graveyard where her father had been laid to rest. The graveyard was located in a neighborhood where her father had lived for several years during his adolescence. For a while now, she'd been thinking to herself that she'd come as soon as the retrial had begun. Somewhere far off, Rika heard the sound of a ship's horn. She could see the expanse of calm yet lonesome-looking summer sea in the distance. After checking that nobody was around, Rika began speaking to the gravestone, on which her father's posthumous Buddhist name was inscribed. "I've started going to cooking lessons. I've learned how to make hollandaise sauce. It's soft-tasting with an acidic kick, a bit like mayonnaise." She remembered his smell, the last time she'd seen him. She hadn't found that scent, a mixture of old tobacco, the sebum of middle-aged men and sake, unpleasant. It wasn't a good smell, but it wasn't a bad one either. It was his smell, her father's smell. She remembered, too, the feel of his beard when he rubbed his face against hers. "I wish I could make it for you. Not at your apartment, though. It's too dirty. I wouldn't want to be in charge of cleaning that place. I'd rather invite you over to mine." Perhaps she'd been getting it wrong all this time. Maybe what had been eating away at her father wasn't loneliness, but rather a sense of shame. That was why he hadn't been able to ask for help. The reason he'd had such a strong reaction when Rika had told him why she couldn't go over to his wasn't anger or despair. He felt ashamed that he'd been treated with cruelty by his daughter, who was the only one he could rely on. Rika recalled what Reiko had said when she came back to the apartment one morning the previous week and told Rika that she'd seen Ryosuke. "We had dinner in Nakamaguro and took a walk," she said. "He seemed relieved to see that I was doing okay. He actually cried, even with all those people around on the weekend. I cried a bit too, I don't really know why. It had been so long since we ate out, just the two of us. On the way home, he invited me to a hotel and I said yes." It's weird, isn't it? I've only ever been to a hotel with him before we married, and even then only a handful of times, so many years ago. Lying in that bed with him in a totally unknown space, our house and the question of kids and us being married and all that felt very far away. I just knew that I was lying next to a man and that his name was Ryosuke. It feels dumb to be so affected by the space you're in. As if suddenly snapping back to herself, Reiko screwed up her face. "It made me think, you know. I really do disagree with my father's way of life. I still hate that idea of not wanting to have sex with someone who feels like family to you. But maybe my parents believed that was the best way for them to stay married. Thinking about it that way makes me feel kind of sorry for them." What had made Reiko want to escape wasn't Ryosuke himself, but that house by the Den-en-toshi line, her hopes for how things would be, and the family setup that they had built. Similarly, what Rika was afraid of wasn't her father himself, but that apartment as it existed within her memory. In the yellowing wallpaper and the dirt stains she had seen sadness. In actual fact, it was just that her father was a lazybones and had slacked off the cleaning. Yet she'd used those elements to stoke her terrifying visions. Blaming herself brought a comfortable kind of pain. As long as she believed that she was in the wrong, she didn't have to worry about forgetting her father, and thereby becoming an even more heartless daughter. The reason she hadn't made the macaroni gratin for her father wasn't because she disliked him and was avoiding him. It was because she didn't have the confidence that she could clean his kitchen and make a smooth bechamel sauce. Maybe if she'd lifted up his body as it lay there face down on the floor, she might have seen that the expression on his face was one of unexpected tranquility. Quite possibly her father didn't resent Rika and her mother. Even if he did, Rika would accept that resentment. "Even if I end up dying alone, I don't think I'll resent people for it. I won't sit around waiting for other people. I'll use my own money to buy ingredients, make the food I want to eat it how I like, and then die. Rika turned from the stone and walked towards the graveyard entrance. She was headed to the cafe, looking out over the sea where her parents had been on their first date. Her mother would usually look pained when speaking of her father, but when she talked about that day, a smile would come over her face. Once again, Rika heard the sound of a ship's horn. Rika was now used to being called into the glass-fronted editor's office. It was rare for the editor to be in the office early in the morning, though. Lately, Rika had started coming in early and leaving by the evening. Even if it put her schedule at odds with the rest of her colleagues, the number of hours she worked remained the same, and so long as she made sure to attend all the meetings, nobody minded. She no longer stayed on late into the night, as she used to. In a bid not to lose the young female readership they had acquired with the Kajii feature, the Shumi Weekly was now doing a feature on the grievous lack of available childcare and its effects on parents. Freed from the burden of futile preparatory research and fruitless dinner dates, she felt less frenetic. I just had someone call me up to check some facts about a story that's going to print as a lead feature in 3 days' time. I'm guessing it'll cause a stir, so I want you to be prepared. For once, the person who tipped me off seemed sympathetic. With this, the chief editor held out a faxed copy of an article from a rival magazine. Seeing the headline, a blue flash blocked out Rika's vision. Exclusive Kajii interview. Her marriage in prison and her relationship with her father. She told us all, right before her retrial. The stuff in the Shumi Weekly was all lies. Discover the sordid truth behind the famous Shumaisha journalist's twisted affection. Rika felt her legs growing soft, as if her entire body had turned to Play-Doh. She pulled up a metal chair and sat down. Licking her dry lips, she flicked through the pages, surveying the topics covered by the article. A part of her had suspected something of this kind might happen one day. It appeared that Kajii had started a relationship with the article's author, a freelance editor in his 50s, and they were now engaged to be married. I recognized the guy's name. Ever since we published our article, he's been shopping it around to all the other publishing houses. I'm guessing he sold it to the one who offered him the most money. He's an oddball, a self-important type who used to work at a major newspaper. He's been banned from a lot of places for causing trouble. There was so much new information for Rika to absorb. The letters in front of her quivered like winged insects. I believe that female journalist from the Shumi Weekly harbored warped feelings for me. She imitated various aspects of my life, the way I lived, what I ate. I think she was trying to live my life as it was before my arrest. She clearly deviated from the journalistic ethical code. To my utmost surprise, she even confided in me about her sex life at times. Maybe she was trying to impress me with her fidelity to me, but I could only see it as sexual harassment. Is this true? Rika looked down at the toes of her loafers. She'd not taken good care of them, and the patent leather was peeling off. It's true, she said weakly. She knew, without lifting her head, that however she tried to excuse her behavior, the editor would just groan. Though they didn't want to, her eyes kept on scanning the words on the page. Her feelings for me were a burden. I don't dislike her, though, even after reading the article she wrote, which was a bundle of lies. So subjective. My lawyer has suggested I press charges, but I've been blessed with this opportunity to speak the truth, and that's taken away my will to do anything more. She simply had a crush on me, that's all. In order to get her point across, in order to ratify the clumsy, selfish, man-hating women that the world is so full of, she's written about the person she wants me to be. A lonely woman full of insecurities who is unable to fit in with other women. That's fine by me. This article by my husband will be the first time that a writer or author represents me as the woman I really am. I've experienced the same kind of misrepresentation many times, from my childhood on. People are attracted to me, voice their illusions onto me, and when I don't go along with it, when I don't live up to their expectations, they turn on me and start behaving in strange, inexplicable ways. I think this will allow the world, finally, to understand that I haven't taken anybody's life. I have no end of regret that those men died, and I have so many memories of our good times together, but unfortunately their lives were lost through their own doing. It has nothing to do with me. Her attack on Rika was only the beginning. Kajii went on to speak about her father. This is the first time I've told anybody this. On that fateful snowy morning, I was actually back visiting my hometown. I didn't return to my parents' house, but met my father in a local hotel. I told him that everything I'd been saying to him about my life in Tokyo was a lie, and I was having my lifestyle financed by men. I said, too, that I had no intention of changing my ways. Well, things grew heated, and I said some things I now painfully regret. It didn't help that I had for a long time been harboring a powerful sense of vexation with my father for keeping up his fraudulent marriage with my mother, whom he didn't love. My father became enraged and slapped me. He wasn't disappointed so much as he was jealous, the kind of jealousy you find between men and women. What my father felt for me was of a different kind to the affection one feels for one's family members, you see. We were more like lovers, emotionally speaking, that is. I think my mother was painfully jealous of that. I believe that my father also took his own life and made it out to be an accident, as a man who'd sought his daughter's love and been betrayed. Was it because she knew the ominous feeling that pervaded the Kajii house that Rika found it impossible to laugh off this statement as sheer delusion? Recalling that room crowded with dried flowers and that all-over itchiness that had remained with her for days after, she felt a profoundly unsettled feeling working its way through her. Maybe I won't live for all that long. But that awareness enables me to feel a powerful love for my husband. All that I've endured up until this point has not been in vain. When I met him, things began going as I wished. This is the first time he's been married, but he is kind enough to have taken in the child of a relative, whom he's bringing up as his own son. I feel the happiness of someone who's suddenly acquired a family. He is one of just a few people who can see me for who I am and understands me, without getting distracted by the clamor of what everybody else is saying. Rika lifted her head, feeling in danger of choking. She gave a dry cough, and her thoughts finally began to assume some order. Thinking of the ordeal that was about to begin, she held her breath for a moment. When she let it out, it felt like an avalanche. Rika took pride in the fact that she had thoroughly researched Kajii's mother and sister, but it was true that she hadn't pursued the matter of Kajii's father. This wasn't out of any lack of interest, but because she had been intentionally avoiding it, knowing that when the subject of fathers came up she would feel it striking against the darkest parts of her. Her article had touched on it only very lightly. She didn't know how accurate what Kajii said in this latest article was, but regardless, Rika's failure to probe this core issue amounted to negligence on her part. Her account differs quite significantly from the facts. All I did was to try and draw out Kajii's own words, Rika finally managed to say, although it took all her strength. The article ended with the statement that Kajii and her husband would publish her biography together. I have a good sense of how you conduct yourself professionally, and I let you write the article in full knowledge of what a piece of work this woman is. But I suspect, for the time being, you'll be on the receiving end of a lot of scrutiny. We can't send you out to cover stories in the way you've been doing. I think it's best for you to take some time off. I need you to be prepared for your way of working to change. It's fine for you to go home for today. The editor's voice was gentler than Rika had ever heard it, and she bowed her head deeply in gratitude. She left the building, doing her utmost not to make eye contact with her colleagues. She knew that she had to go and meet Kajii right away. Even now, a part of her wanted to believe that there was an alternative interpretation for what was going on. She headed straight for the detention house, taking a train and then a taxi, doing her best to keep her mind blank. The rails in front of her, the steps, the people she met, all lacked any sense of reality, as though they were images she was seeing on her phone screen. Before Rika knew it, 2 hours had passed since she'd arrived at reception. She waited and waited, but her number wasn't called. Rays of sun baked the black asphalt. She stepped out into the road, realizing too late that the light was red. A car went gliding past, brushing right by her toes, and her body was instantly drenched in sweat. She made to step back, but her body wouldn't move. She heard the car brake and her vision began to spin. A dull pain ran through the base of her stomach. She saw the bright blue sky spreading out above her, and the next moment her eyelid brushed against the hot concrete. Fine grit flew into her eyes. At the edge of her vision, she could see the color of blood, which she supposed to be her own, and she eventually realized that her right arm and leg were seized with pain the likes of which she'd not felt before. The shirt and trousers she was wearing had ripped, exposing her skin. She could tell by the vibration of the hot ground on her bare skin that the car had stopped for long enough for the driver to see what kind of state she was in, and then driven off. With her cheeks scraping along the ground, she somehow managed to drag herself over to the pavement. The rough, uneven texture of the concrete, the flattened pieces of gum, and particles of dust and grit, none of which she ever noticed when she was walking, made her choke several times. Smelling an acrid, herbaceous scent, she lifted her eyes to see some chrysanthemums arranged in an empty bottle and placed under the guardrail, just like they had been that first day she'd come here. Maybe the person commemorated by these flowers had lost their life because of Kajii, or someone like Kajii. Lying curled up on the pavement, Rika understood. This was how Kajii's victims had died. The thing they had treasured had been cruelly shattered. She had to face it this time. Kajii was a killer. It didn't matter whether or not she'd murdered her victims with her own hands. Clearly, there resided within her a violent loathing of other people. Rika hadn't been able to see it until she herself had been struck off. The situation had come about through her own lack of care, but without the damage Kajii had inflicted on her, she would never have sunk this low. There was no doubt that those three men had experienced the same flow of emotions, the same shock. The freelance editor now engaged to Kajii would probably, sooner or later, experience the same sorts of feelings. With trepidation, Rika ran the palm of her hand across her body. Her knees and elbows were badly grazed. Glimpsing the vivid red blood and the exposed pink flesh, she shook and looked away. Her blood-wet fingertips were dusted with grit. Rika thought back to when she'd hurt herself as a child. Hadn't she stared tirelessly at her wounds, as if they were something unrelated to her? She felt as though time was flowing slowly around her. She was lying on the pavement, but she felt tremendously calm, as if she were lounging around on the floor of her own room. The blue sky fell down towards her. If she shut her eyes now, she could go to sleep. Just as she was thinking that, she caught sight of the hem of a pair of jeans and a pair of trainers, connected by two slim legs. "Are you okay?" Hearing the woman's voice, Rika looked up. The young woman with a child looking down in concern at Rika from far above was, without doubt, a person standing in safety on the shore. She wore a striped jersey top, and her cheeks were a healthy-looking shade of pink. Even in circumstances like this, Rika found herself adopting the journalist's mindset and wondering what it would be like to bring up a child right by the detention house. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the washing strung up outside the tall apartment blocks flapping in the breeze. "Shall I call the police?" "An ambulance." The woman crouched down and looked at Rika with her bright brown eyes. Rika finally sat up and looked back at the woman. She hunched over and folded her legs, thinking that she shouldn't reveal the sight of her blood to the little boy, who was currently hiding behind his mother. "I'm okay, I'm sorry. I stepped out into the road without looking at the lights. It was my own fault. I've not broken anything. I'll go home and clean myself up." "All right, but you shouldn't move right now. I'll hail a taxi for you, okay? Do you live far away?" "In the city center." "Thank you, sorry about this." "Don't worry about it at all. My son falls over all the time. He's constantly injuring himself. When he finds a friend he's particularly fond of, he's not satisfied until they've had a fight and have both got covered in mud and scrapes." Perhaps attempting to take Rika's mind off her injuries, the woman went on speaking lightheartedly as she took wet wipes and a towel out of her bag. Then she stood up and reached a supple arm towards the road and waved, then quickly drew it in with a disappointed face. "You're gonna get a scab." Rika now noticed a pair of black eyes, pinned on her grazes. Showing no fear, the boy was bending down and staring at her injuries. His envious look took Rika aback. "Hey, stop that. Gosh, I'm so sorry about him. He loves peeling scabs more than anything else in this world. He peels those of his friends as well." The young woman's eyes were still trained on the road as she spoke. Rika saw that the boy's palms and his knees that extended from his shorts were peppered with scars, presumably from peeling his scabs. The boy whispered in her ear as if revealing a prized secret, "Scabs taste really good." Rika looked in shock at those soft-looking cheeks. The young mother, waving her right arm, oblivious to what was going on between the two of them, finally managed to hail a cab. Rika thanked the woman, who helped her to her feet, and then got in. The doors closed. The smell of air freshener was too strong for the cab's small interior. The taxi driver, a man in his late 60s, she'd have guessed, was looking at Rika. To ensure she didn't leave any blood on the seat, she took out a handkerchief, spread it out beneath her, and sat down again. The sight of the little boy standing beside his mother and waving slowly receded. Across the river, Tokyo's skytree shone even brighter in the distance. Rika closed her eyes. 30 minutes later, Rika asked the taxi to stop outside the biggest supermarket in the Kagurazaka area, which had a chemist inside. There she picked up bandages, antiseptic fluid, plasters, and gauze. She had no appetite, but she needed to buy something nourishing to drink. She didn't feel like meeting Shinoi and the others, who would surely already know about Kajii's betrayal. She knew that once she got back to her own apartment, she wouldn't have the energy to go out again, or to cook. When she thought about the night she would spend alone, she felt scared and searched around desperately for something that might take her mind off it. Just then, the white light spilling from the supermarket called to her. She floated unsteadily over to the dairy section and found her eyes immediately directed to the small packet with its crisp navy logo exerting enough power to eclipse all the other products around it. To think that a regular supermarket, such as this one, would stock Ekire butter. Checking the price, she saw it was less than 1,000 yen. Not just that, either, but there was a whole assortment of different kinds of butter filling the display: cultured, aged, salted, unsalted. Until just a few months ago, it was difficult to find. Things changed at such speed. For a while, Rika stood still, bathing in the white light of the dairy section. It was the first time she'd noticed, in her 10 years of living in that apartment, the peculiar shape of the ceiling. It looked like a building block castle that had collapsed. Like the room above and those on either side were encroaching on her territory, little by little. The walls and the ceiling pressed in on her, and the space around her shrunk. She found herself hoping for the day when the walls would cave in altogether, obliterating everything inside this place, herself included. She closed her eyes. She wasn't remotely sleepy, but she couldn't get out of bed. Today was the 3rd day of the 7-day leave of absence the editor had given her. Her most recent class at Le Salon de Mayuko had been scheduled for 4 days earlier. After a lot of deliberation, Rika had decided to go along. Reiko had texted her several times, saying she was worried about her and wanted to go with her, but Rika had refused her offer, replying that she was sorry, but she'd prefer if she didn't. When she pushed the intercom buzzer and hesitantly stated her false name, she heard Madame's soft voice say, "That's not your real name, is it? Go home, please. Will you at least let me return your notebook?" Rika had pleaded, cold sweat running down her back, but the door hadn't opened. "It's yours now. You can keep it. Don't come back here again. Please tell Ms. Aino as well." Her tone was businesslike and devoid of emotion. From the silence in the background, Rika felt she could sense the anger of the other students. It was a perfectly executed revenge. Since when had Kajii been hatching this plan? Had she had the idea from the moment that Rika made contact with her, or when she'd first pleaded to become her friend? Was it Kajii's meeting with Reiko that had triggered it all? Or was it a consequence of the time when Rika had pushed Kajii away? The night before, Rika had hesitantly done an internet search of her own name and, just as she'd thought, had been met by a deluge of abuse. Photos from an interview she'd once done for the in-house women's magazine, without makeup and wearing clothes she didn't particularly like, had been published online, so people knew what she looked like. There were more unpleasant comments about her appearance than she'd been expecting. In fact, she found far more comments directed at her figure and her face than opinions about the article itself. The fact that Rika had never thought of herself as particularly overweight or ugly made it all the more shocking for these accusations to be leveled against her. What stood out the most were the impassioned comments about how, as a woman in an industry where you had to engage with the public, failing to regulate her weight and put on makeup was lazy and showed a lack of effort. It struck Rika that this was the same gaze that had been turned on Kajii all this time, and she felt she understood why Kajii would choose to remain so stubbornly within her own subjective world. When it came to appearance, the world's standards were so harsh that, unless you built thick walls like she had done, unless you continued to affirm yourself with a great tenacity of spirit, it became difficult to lead your life with a sense of pride. There were lots of comments, too, about how Rika had had feelings for Kajii, how she was projecting and glorifying the facts of her case, and how her love-hate relationship with Kajii stemmed from her own insecurities. Her eyes lingered on a suggestion that she could do well to learn from Kajii's resilience and wisdom. What hit Rika the hardest was that these heartless criticisms made by invisible individuals were not all completely off the mark. Rika felt herself to have grown braver in recent months, but that was only a very slight change, occurring within a safe environment which she was lucky to have access to, under the protection of the people she was close to. Really, nothing at all had changed about her since she was at school. With every comment she read, a pain would go shooting through her head as if it were about to split open, and her esophagus would burn as if someone had tossed a burning splint inside. Yet, she carried on reading them for hours. Sometimes, a memory would come back to her, something from her childhood, an expression on her mother's face, her period of popularity in high school, the various encounters and successes she'd had since joining the company. Joining up the criticism in front of her with those memories, her life up until this point began to seem fictional. Once she was past the initial shock, though, she began to take a certain kind of pleasure in the situation. The more she was denigrated, the more she felt that her body, her will, and her feelings had all melted away and ceased to be visible to anybody else. She felt as though she herself had vanished, become just one part of the various episodes surrounding the Kajii case. Spending all that time on her laptop made her feel wired, yet bereft of energy. She was incapable of contacting Reiko or Shinoi or her mother. 3 days ago, she'd sent them all a message saying the same thing. She was so busy with work she was having to stay over at the office and couldn't see them. She felt certain that if she met any of them, she'd no longer be able to rein in her emotions. She'd crumble and never be able to put herself back together again. She was receiving huge numbers of phone calls and emails from all kinds of people, but she had no will to reply. She knew that she should ask somebody for help, but she also knew that nobody could save her. She suspected that before long, she'd tender her resignation. Going by how things had been progressing in the retrial, it looked unlikely that Kajii would escape a life sentence. The defense appeared to be pushing the angle that it was Kajii's sexuality that had wreaked confusion on the people around her and led the victims to die of their own accord, but to Rika, this strategy seemed likely only to buy antagonism from the judges. Yet Kajii's way of life, her commitment to remaining true to her own desires even while she wrecked the lives of those around her, was far more fulfilling than Rika's was currently. Even if she'd not voiced her feelings to anyone, Rika had in the past been critical of the victims for simply waiting for someone to step in to help them, for being too proud to ask for help. You should reach out to other people, you should rely on others, Rika had preached to the people around her. Helping and depending on one another is nothing to be ashamed of. But now it was her own turn to be in trouble. She found herself incapable of doing what she'd been advocating. Just the thought of being seen in this state by someone like Reiko or Shinoi, who knew everything she'd done and had been trying to do all this time, made her grow hot all over so that her skin hurt. How strong Reiko and Shinoi must have been, she realized now, for taking the hand she'd extended to them. Maybe it was in fact them who had been supporting her this entire time. The last time Rika had spent this long doing nothing was in her early childhood. She was realizing she didn't have any pastimes outside of her work. Her empty stomach would feel hollow, but she had no urge to fill it. From time to time, she'd have a jelly drink. She turned over in bed again and again, trying to rid herself of the ache in her stomach. As she was doing this, her finger brushed up against something rough. She looked down to see her exposed knee peeking out from her sweat shorts. The graze was covered with a red scab of the sort that felt tempting to pick, just as the little boy outside the detention house had said it would be. Rika sat herself up and inspected it. Against the white background of her skin, the scab looked like a richly colored meal of some kind. In fact, it looked quite a bit like bacon fried in butter. She could see why the boy had talked about how tasty they were. When he'd said so, she'd been horrified, but before she'd entered kindergarten, Rika herself had felt no hesitation in eating her scabs. She would also bite her nails, and if she came across a smooth pebble of a sweet-looking color, she'd put it in her mouth to find out how it tasted. That had been at the camping grounds in Gotemba by Mount Fuji. She remembered her mother's face as she urged Rika to spit the pebble out. As Rika went on caressing the scab, a chunk of it fell off. Holding the broken-off piece between her fingers, Rika looked at it, then moved it up to her mouth and licked it. That clump of blackish blood was perhaps a miniature version of what had formed in her father's head when he died face down on the floor. All roads led back to her father, her face, this body of hers so ready to put on weight, her way of losing sight of herself. She recalled that milk came from blood. The same must then be true of butter. She licked the blood on the scab again. It tasted of metal and sweat. Feeling a slimy sensation on her leg, she looked down to see a thin thread of blood trickling from the wound, though it didn't hurt in the slightest. Maybe the scab wasn't ready to come off yet. Watching the dark red droplets stain the sheets, she noticed the room was growing dim. What time was it? Rika got out of bed. The blood in her body plummeted to her feet, and she stood still with her right hand on the bed to steady herself, waiting for her vision to grow lighter again. She tentatively opened the curtain to see the sky was tinted the mid-blue of early evening. She opened the window and a warmer breeze than she'd expected came rushing in. Soothed by this, she headed to the kitchen. She didn't feel hungry, but she knew that she had to eat. She opened up the fridge, but it was empty except for some seasonings and a packet of butter. She cut off a piece with a butter knife and put it on her tongue. Her body flinched at first at its sharp coldness, but the chunk soon melted like honey, forming an unctuous film across her dry mouth. It was a sign, Rika thought, that her body was still producing heat. She wasn't like Kajii's victims. She could get up of her own accord. She could put things in her own mouth. She could taste them too. She would ask for help. Rika summoned up the last of her strength. She reached for her phone and found in her contacts list the name she was searching for. She had nothing left to lose. If he said no, that was fine, she said to herself, sending the text with a trembling finger. I'm sorry to ask, but would you mind bringing me something to eat? Don't worry if you can't. Rika knew that to get herself out of this place, she had to traverse the bewilderingly long path towards the light. To do so, she had to line up the lowest hurdles she could find and jump them, starting by calling upon the people she felt able to call on. She didn't know how long she had been lying down for when the doorbell rang. Rika opened her eyes. Looking at her phone, she saw it was past 10 in the evening. The apartment was pitch black. When she got up, her stomach twisted and she winced in pain. She could tell that her breath smelt terrible. She had had no energy for attending either to her appearance or the state of the apartment. She turned on the light and went to the door, dressed in her sweatshirt and joggers. The man standing in the hall was a stranger. He had a towel draped around his thick neck. A slightly undersized emerald green t-shirt with a caricature and name of an idol clung to his body. I was at Megumi's leaving concert tonight, so I came straight over after it finished. I thought you'd given up on her, Rika made to say, but she stopped herself. Makoto didn't seem particularly concerned by her appearance, taking off his trainers and stepping into the apartment. When he moved past her, a flat paper fan, with a photograph of Megumi's face, sticking out of his backpack grazed her nose. As Rika was wondering what he'd brought for her, Makoto washed his hands in the sink and then took out milk, eggs, and pancake mix from a plastic bag. He opened the packet of pancake mix into a small pan he found on the drying rack, stirred in the milk, then broke in the eggs. There was no need to tell him where anything was. "Thank you," she mumbled, lying down on the bed and shutting her eyes. Just letting a living being inside her flat was the limit to what she could manage. She heard the sound of cooking chopsticks scraping against the side of the pan. The floury smell reached her. She didn't really want to eat, and she wasn't sure why he'd brought pancakes, but she was grateful for the simple fact that someone was cooking for her. "I'm in such a miserable state. You're the only one I felt I could ask. I know I've got a nerve to be in touch, given the way we broke up. But I needed it to be someone not too close, or else I couldn't do it." She heard the fridge opening. He didn't seem to have heard her. "Oh, good. You've got butter," he said. Soon after, Rika heard the sizzle of butter melting in a hot frying pan. It smelled to her like life itself. Maybe because it was animal fat, there was a rough, raw depth and fragrance to its smell, which you didn't get with vegetable oil or margarine. Rika addressed Makoto again. "You read that article, right? I want to apologize to you. My guess is you're the one that it hurt the most." I told Kajii about the night that we stayed in the hotel. Not in any detail. Kajii went on so proudly about the taste of butter ramen eaten straight after having sex that I wanted to know what it was like. I felt that if I knew, I might better understand her, and so with his back still turned to her, Makoto broke in. I was definitely surprised when I first read it, and angry too. But I think I realized even in the moment that there was something going on. It was the first time you'd ever initiated things like that. I briefly wondered if the Shumi Weekly was finally running the 10 ways to keep having sex until you die feature. That's just how you are. Everything's related to your work. The same goes for me, I guess. Maybe in that way we were well suited. We really didn't talk, did we? Rika felt a sense of relief flooding through her. As it did, a gust of cool air flowed through her throat, making the back of her nose hurt. I think if we were still together, I wouldn't be able to let it go, but we're not. I told you before about that time when I was a kid, and I felt so envious of the cakes my friend's mother made, right? My elder sister saw that and took pity on me, so she bought some pancake mix and cooked me pancakes. She said that the trick is to make them exactly as it says on the back of the box. You made me a cake for Valentine's Day ages ago, remember? So this is in return for that. You say ages ago, but it's only been 3 months, Rika said in a critical tone, surprised by how hurtful she found his comment. Wow, it really feels like years ago. Coming over to this apartment as well. At the end of the story of Little Babaji, they make pancakes out of the tigers that have transformed into butter and eat them. I think they mix the tiger butter into the batter. Or put it on top. Maybe they even melt it in the frying pan. But Rika's words got lost amid the sound of the pancake mix being poured into the pan. She heard the noise of the pancake being flipped and sticking again to the pan. After a while, Makoto came over with a plate in his hand. The perfectly round, golden brown pancake was steaming, the maple syrup shining, and the knob of butter on top beginning to melt. She brought her hands together and said, "Itadakamasu." With a fork, Rika broke off a small piece of the pancake, revealing its bright yellow insides. The way that the batter with its structure of fine air bubbles and countless little pillars supported the surface layer, burnished to a deep brown, was proof that it had been well mixed. The butter slid around sluggishly. Rika put a tiny sliver into her mouth. She instructed her teeth to bite, and with some effort, succeeded in moving her mouth, chewing the soft, warm pancake into which the salted butter and syrup had been absorbed. Her stomach let out a sound as if it were being wrung. She could taste what was in her mouth, could feel its texture and temperature. That in itself was proof she was past the worst stage. She felt a blockage in her chest, but she forced down another bite. Her throat felt hot and stuffed. She moved her fork again. When she'd eaten about a quarter of the pancake, she reached her limit. Fighting back the urge to throw up, she set down her fork. I realized, she began, noticing how sweet her breath was. I was trying to sumo wrestle all by myself. I was going round and round in circles and ended up compromising both my workplace and my sense of belonging and hurting the people around me. Just like Kajii's victims. She'll keep on winning over people by trampling all over people. Maybe people like her will multiply, and people like me will be wiped out, and then everyone will be destroyed. She suspected that, as usual, Makoto would say something optimistic that effectively ended the conversation, but he said nothing. When he did speak, it was after Rika had forced down another mouthful of the pancake. "You know Megumi, the idol I support?" As he said this, Rika realized that it was her name written on his T-shirt. "I figured she'd lose weight before her final concert, but in fact she was even chubbier. She looked really happy though, like she was having fun. She put on a brilliant performance. It's just like you said, I stopped supporting her because she was being criticized. There were so many people laughing at her, and I became scared of supporting her because it felt like I myself was being laughed at, so I gave up on her. Even though there's no need to care about what other people think with that kind of stuff. I was letting other people determine my tastes without realizing it." Makoto was talking at an alarming speed. Rika felt stunned, but she also felt relieved. It made her realize that Makoto had had these kinds of conversations with lots of people, even if he hadn't with her. This was the real Makoto, not the spotless, special occasion version of himself he'd shown her while they'd been together. Come to think of it, before they'd started going out, Makoto had been the kind of person to speak ardently for hours on all kinds of things, from waste water pipes to classic films. I think that when I saw her putting on weight and becoming a different person, I felt left behind, somehow. It made me feel neglected, as though she was ignoring the fans' hopes for her. But today she seemed to be having a great time. Do you find it gross to hear me talking like this? Maybe a bit gross. But it's interesting, Rika said with a smile. She felt relieved that she could still do it, could still raise the corners of her mouth and let her voice go a bit higher. Even at a time like this, she was pleased to hear Makoto speaking at length about the things he liked. "I'm really glad I went to the concert. I think it'll go down in history, and I'll be able to tell people I was there. And that's all thanks to you. I don't think I'd have gone if you hadn't said what you did. You know, I don't know if I've been cheered up or used as an outlet for your otaku ravings." As she said this, it occurred to Rika that maybe her relationship with Kajii hadn't been too dissimilar to that between an idol and a fan. "Okay, I'm gonna head off." "Oh, this is their CD. Have a listen if you feel like it. The songs are really good." Makoto handed her a CD still wrapped in polythene and stood up. Seeing the mess he'd made of the kitchen, he winced apologetically, but Rika laughed and shook her head. No, you go to bed. I'm sorry for calling on you like this." "Thank you. I'm genuinely grateful. The pancakes were really good." "And I'll listen to this later," Rika said, holding up the CD. "Oh yeah. You know the shorts I left here? Can I take them? I'm going to the Boso Peninsula for Megumi's final tour, and I thought I'd take them with me." "I haven't washed them," Rika said, pulling them from their allocated spot in the closet and handing them to him. Why was it that she'd not thought of getting rid of them before? Makoto put on his shoes in the entranceway and waved. Rika waved back. The door closed and the room was silent again. She could still smell his smell, but it didn't make her feel anything. Maybe he had only come over because he'd wanted to share his post-gig elation with someone. He'd said what he wanted to say, then he'd had enough. Even so, Rika felt grateful, even just for that. It seemed peculiar to her that she'd ever slept with him or had any kind of serious conversation with him. If Makoto ever reached out to her in need, she thought, she'd help him out, whatever the situation. She got the feeling that he was going to be on his own for some time. She went back to her bedroom and inserted the CD he'd given her into the disk drive of her computer. She glanced down at the half-eaten pancake, which had grown cold and hard. She broke off a piece and moved it to her mouth. There was an artificial sweetness and bitterness to the taste that hadn't bothered her when they'd just been cooked. The butter, which had hardened inside the dough, now struck her tongue with a chilly sensation. The sense of profound excitement she'd felt the very first time she tasted good butter, right here in this apartment, came back to her now as vividly as if it had happened a few seconds ago. Try as she might, she couldn't accept that the last 6 months had been for nothing. She tried counting up all the tastes and aromas that she would never have encountered if she'd hadn't met Kajii. However embarrassed she felt of what she'd been through, Rika suspected that the experience had been in some way necessary. Glancing down, she noticed that the blood which had run when her scab had fallen off had now started to set. Touching a finger to it, she found it of a jelly-like consistency. She remembered how the young mother had described her son as someone who felt compelled to start fights with the people he liked the most, who tried to peel off other people's scabs as well as his own. To drink in a person in their entirety, to chew them up until there was nothing left of them, that was Kajii's mode of communication. It was maybe also her way of loving somebody, like peeling off a scab again and again to create a scar that would never go away. Had she not loved Rika, too, even if that love had been of a supremely warped kind? Looking round the room, she noticed that the walls and ceiling didn't seem to press in on her as they had done before. The scabs on her elbow and knees were a sign that Rika was regenerating, or at least starting to. The now-cooled butter left white tracks across the surface of the pancakes like the trails of a shooting star. Blood and butter both hardened in no time, which was why she would be okay. The song playing from her computer was a funky disco track, surprisingly lacking in saccharine sweetness, filling the lifeless room with a humidity and a burst of primary colors that put Rika in mind of the jungle. She tossed her dirty clothes into the washing machine, flung in a gel pod, and pressed the night mode button. The quiet sound of the machine whirring and the sound of the young girls' voices seemed to chase each other round and round, catching up with each other and blending together.